When disaster strikes at sea, there is often only one place that the occupants of a ship or a plane can take refuge: the lifeboat, or in modern senses, the life raft. Welcome back to 5 Minute History, the weekly series where patrons choose the topic. This one comes from Matilda. Over the centuries, the design, materials, and deployment of mechanisms of lifeboats have evolved dramatically, with the ship's boats initially existing as a mode of transportation before being shaped by innovation, legislation, and of course, lessons learned from maritime tragedies into what they are today. In the earliest of days of seafaring, the concept of a dedicated lifeboat was virtually non-existent. Most ships carried small boats often used for ferrying goods or passengers to shore, rather than as emergency craft. Generally speaking, large man of war and also larger frigates would carry multiple boats that could be used for things like beach landings or boarding actions. Saving lives was simply an added bonus in times of disaster. These boats were typically made of timber, manually powered by oars, sometimes sails if they were large enough for a small mast, and they lacked any shelter or navigational aids. In emergencies, they were often inadequate both in number and in function. A great example of how poor they were in their role was actually in the historical fiction novel The Fortune of War by Patrick O'Brian. In that novel, Jack Aubrey and his crew were stuck at sea for weeks in a small boat. Because of the lack of shelter and rations, the men nearly starve to death, die of thirst, and they are burnt to a crisp by the sun. Lifeboats today, well, they have changed a lot. But it wasn't until the late 18th and early 19th centuries that the idea of purpose-built lifeboats began to gain traction, and this was mostly driven by growing maritime trade and increasing incidents at sea. Lifeboat design began to receive more attention, particularly in Britain, where much of the early development occurred. Lifeboats began to be designed with self-righting capabilities and buoyant materials. In the early days, this was mostly things like cork, which also went into life jackets. The thing with cork, though, is once it becomes waterlogged, it's basically a lead weight. In Australia, as the colonial ports of Melbourne and Sydney, amongst others, became hubs for coastal shipping but also international trade, particularly with Sydney and Melbourne, vessels operating in local waters were gradually influenced by overseas developments, but Australia really lagged behind in terms of safety, as did a lot of far-flung outposts of empire. What really changed things, though, was in 1912 when the RMS Titanic struck an iceberg and went down. Now, this was a major turning point in the global understanding of maritime safety. The ship, which carried more than 2,200 passengers and crew, had lifeboats for just over 1,100. But not even that many got aboard them, with over 1,500 people going down with the ship. Many simply because there weren't enough boats and spaces for them to sit in them. Although it's genuinely quite arguable whether or not they would have had enough time to launch more boats even if they had them in the first place. We tragically saw that come to fruition just a few years later with the loss of RMS Lusitania, with barely any of her boats going into the water compared to the total number aboard. The Titanic disaster prompted the international maritime community to actually take action, though, and the immediate creation of SOLAS occurred not long after the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea. There would be no more women and children first, as the precedent had been set in 1852 on the Birkenhead. In future, people would be able to get off the ship if she was going down. With Britain, the leading world maritime power at the time, the convention started to become widespread. Both World War I and World War II, though, like with the Titanic disaster, would trigger another period of rapid technological advancement in maritime equipment and safety, and naturally, this included lifeboats. The war years saw the development of new materials such as aluminium and steel for lifeboat construction, improving durability and fire resistance, particularly when things like splinters become involved. Engine-powered lifeboats also became more common, and this allowed for greater autonomy during rescues, and it also really allowed people to rescue themselves by getting to land. Inflatable life rafts would also be popularised, although they had been introduced in the past in the form of collapsible canvas boats. Titanic itself carried 4. It was during the World Wars that fully inflatable craft would actually start to be introduced, and these rafts were very compact, easy to deploy, and they were stored often in very highly pressurized canisters aboard not only ships but also planes. The thing with these canisters as well is they were quite effective because modern ships were having a problem where space was becoming a premium. Particularly in the Pacific War, where every available inch of deck space was taken up by an anti-aircraft gun. By the 50s and 60s, life rafts were a common sight on merchant vessels and cruise ships around the world. In Australia, the expansion of maritime industries such as whaling and fishing pushed life innovation. vessels operating in remote or hazardous environments were required to be more robust in their safety systems. Today, ships' lifeboats bear little resemblance to the wooden dinghies of centuries past. Modern lifeboats are typically fully enclosed, engine-powered, and constructed from fire-retardant fiberglass or composite materials. Many are designed to be self-righting, making them, provided they remain watertight, unsinkable, and capable of withstanding extreme weather conditions with seatbelts inside to keep the passengers from bopping around and hurting themselves. It's not just the boats itself that has been evolved, it's also the davit systems. While in the past lifeboats were lowered slowly into the water, free-fall lifeboats, where the boat drops directly into the sea from a ramp, are now widely used on all cargo ships and offshore platforms. This system allows for rapid deployment even in rough seas. This is a critical improvement over those earlier winches, because if they failed, or if the ship started to list, it wasn't uncommon, like in the case of the Lusitania, for occupants to simply be spilled into the sea. Cruise ships also now carry large tender lifeboats that double as transport vessels during shore excursions. These lifeboats are equipped with GPS, communication systems, and can carry up to 150 people in safety and comfort while being connected at all times to the outside world. Innovation in lifeboat technology continues, with research into electric-powered lifeboats utilizing solar power and advanced materials. They're basically becoming autonomous survival capsules. Some newer designs even include desalination plants, small ones, to support long-term survival at sea. In just 200 years, we've evolved from open-top wooden rowboats to high-tech little survival capsules. This kind of evolution reflects a broad story of technological progress and a recognition of how valuable human life actually is. Thank you for joining me on this another bite-sized bit of history that I can't seem to keep under 5 minutes. I'll catch you all next week with the next Patreon chosen topic.